All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Graham Thomas. I am the SVP of RIABiz. Um, and we are a trade publication for registered investment advisors, now in our 10th year. Today, we will be discussing the findings from a study Genivity has commissioned on how consumers currently are thinking and feeling about financial planning in a global pandemic. And with that, I will kick it over to Heather Holmes, CEO and founder of Genivity. Heather, it's all you.
Thank you, Graham. And thank you all for joining us today. We here at Genivity have been really interested in trying to bring some of the data that we've been hearing back from our customers who are the advisors about some of the conversations and sentiments that have been happening with their clients. And so today what we're here to present to you is some of the research that we've been doing in the months of August and September by looking at consumers across the United States. But before that, I just think it's important to just share a little bit about who we are. So what is Genivity? We're a software platform that's designed intentionally for financial advisors to be able to use with their clients, to help their clients understand the unique connection between longevity and health and those related expenses and how that can impact their financial plan. So as I mentioned, the survey purpose was to understand consumer behaviors, and as the pandemic is entering into its 7th and 8th months here, how is that shifting how they think about their health, their wealth, and are there other things that advisors can do to address those concerns? So before we dive into the data, I just want to give you a little bit about the methodology. So we did a survey monkey survey. We got back over 161 responses from across the US. It took participants less than 5 minutes to complete. Criteria was anybody in the US over age 22 for our first phase. And in our second phase, we looked specifically at people who had an annual income of $175,000 or above. And so just a quick snapshot of the demographics. As you'll see here, we got a pretty wide representation from ages from 22 to 39, all the way up to 76 plus, representing a really good swath across the US. And from a gender perspective, about 70% of our respondents were female. From a net worth perspective, I believe it was around 35% were in the mass affluent. We had around 15% in the high net worth and around 4% in the ultra high net worth category. And basically, we started out trying to understand how has the pandemic changed their attitude towards their finances. And there was obviously a wide range of responses, but in general, the thought was that people were wanting to figure out what they can do today to make a difference for the future. And for those who were actually working with a financial advisor already, there was good responses back about how fortunate they felt to have a goals-based plan and to understand what was going to happen from that perspective. I'm not going to go too deep into these general findings. You'll all receive the additional reporting that will come out of this, but it's very interesting when you look at clients who or participants who had advisors versus those who did not, and the opportunity. This presentation today, which is a highlight summary, we're going to focus on the 4 big insights and takeaways that focus around optimization for the participant, around their health-related concerns within short-term planning and longer-term planning, where caregiving is fitting for them, and then ultimately, what's a great advisor conversation and opportunity based on these insights. So all this is meant to help you, the advisor, really expand those client conversations right now during this virtual world we're living in. So starting with the top concern that came back, what we wanted to understand, and the top insight was, what are people's concerns as it relates to the pandemic and their financial well-being? And what was interesting about this is what we started to see was that people were looking for ways that they could take some control over their life. Most of us are still in our homes. We're pretty limited in what we're able to do. A lot of these things are out of our control. So what the research came back pretty loud and clear was that over 57% were saying, I want to understand what I can do today to stay as active and healthy as possible so that I'm able to achieve my financial goals. And another concern that kept coming up was people really interested in understanding what were things that they can do today. So how can they optimize their lifestyle? What can they be optimizing from a financial perspective today, right now, so that they can really protect financial future and their ability to continue to work and contribute to that financial future. So conversations around how can they do something today. We segmented out this research in a couple of different ways, but right now I'm just going to focus on highlighting the segmentation by gender. In the appendix, you'll be able to see some of the other ways to look at this. But what I really wanted to call out was when we looked at what were the top concerns and what people wanted to do, when you look at it from a female versus a male perspective, they're not that different. But what we did see was that 50% of women were really focused on trying to make lifestyle changes today that would help them optimize their finances and help them stay healthy for that active future versus 35% of men. So that was kind of the key insight that we saw from this research there. The second key insight was really focused around how the pandemic has put a spotlight on people's health and how things that they're doing today can really impact that. And so when we asked participants, when they were thinking about their financial plan, where does health and future healthcare needs fall into it? 79% came back saying healthcare costs were either the most important or a somewhat important consideration for their financial plan and their financial future. In this research, when we were looking at this, specifically once again by gender, we were seeing women were 2.5% or 2.5 more times more likely to say that it was the most important consideration. Now here what we're doing is we're breaking that same research out by net worth. And what you can see across the different levels of investable assets, that healthcare costs still were showing up as somewhat important consideration, loud and proud across this. And while healthcare costs were the most important consideration for, for half of this group, but it was an important consideration for all in this group. So some of the insights coming out of this was just how this has really changed it and made this a more serious topic and made people realize that they were wanting to do steps now to make sure that they've covered all the bases in their plan. The third insight I'm going to cover is caregiving. Caregiving is something that is a kind of a silent part of many people's lives and is being well represented throughout COVID, whether this was COVID related or just ongoing caregiving issues or new caregiving issues. But what this has done is really made people afraid of what would happen to their loved ones and what will they need to do from a financial perspective, where's this information, and it's made it more tricky for them to do their day-to-day caregiving. From the actual research, what we found here is that caregiving is taking this toll. More and more people are finding them engaged in these activities, whether it's financially, physically, or both. And of the participants and respondents, 37% are currently caregiving for either a family member or a loved one. What we normally see in the US is about 20% of Americans are in some sort of caregiving role with loved ones. So we're seeing that this is bringing out more caregiving issues with people as the pandemic's been going on. From a financial perspective, what this means is we looked at how much people are spending to help provide this unpaid caregiving. This means they're doing the caregiving themselves and also financially helping out. And what we found was that 19% of our participants said they're spending $1,000 or more of their own money on caregiving costs. So these are real concerns and real issues to engage a client in and to help understand when you're trying to create a touch point for them. Now, breaking this out across net worth, what we found when we were asking about who's doing caregiving is it's a pretty even split across between that 30 and 50% mark. But we are seeing a high level of people in that over 10 million mark who are really getting involved in caregiving duties. So might be a surprise to some here. And then looking once again at that distribution of what people are contributing to care. As we mentioned, over 19% are providing over $1,000 in care-related support to their loved ones. So what does this mean from an advisor conversation and an advisor opportunity? Well, one of the things that we started to identify really clearly was that health savings accounts, and even in some cases where appropriate, FSAs, are an amazing untapped opportunity for advisors to engage clients in that can give them an action they can do in the near future. And so when we asked people about this, what were some of the things that people were thinking about? What came back again and again, well, people were really confused about how to figure out how much future costs will be and how much they should be setting aside for a medical emergency fund, for co-pays, for regular appointments. All this information that can be very tricky to drill down to, and that they're looking for help trying to figure that out. But when we ask them, do you currently have an HSA or an FSA, so an ability to either pre-tax contribute money towards future medical expenses, what we found was that there were, a low percentage who were using an HSA or an FSA. And so this means this is a wide open opportunity for advisors who can touch their clients to talk to them about why investing in a health savings account or an FSA might make sense for them, and what are some of the benefits available there. Taking another slice of this, what we did was take this one step further and say, so maybe you don't have an HSA or an FSA today. What are you thinking about as you approach the open enrollment period for health insurance, which is something that comes up for most of us in the fall, which why it makes it such a great opportunity for advisors to engage there. And so let me stop my alarm there. And so what I wanted to highlight from this part of this research was the fact that while 30% or lower are thinking about starting to enroll at this next enrollment period, this is a great way to touch point with those clients and let them know some of the additional tax benefits that can happen from an HSA and investing and putting that towards the future. But for all of these people who are still saying no, what this can also allow you to do is to see where, which can also help you allow them to see that an HSA could be an investable opportunity. So whether people are thinking about this today or not thinking about it, either way, this is a great approach for advisors to talk to their clients about. So in summary, before we turn over to our wonderful panel of experts that we're really excited to have share their insights today, what I wanted to share with you is just a summary. So the first thing is that as the pandemic is continuing, we're still living in this virtual world. People are looking for what they can control and how to optimize. So being able to engage clients or prospects in conversation around that is a good win. The second key win in conversation is health. It's top of mind. COVID's put a spotlight on it, and advisors are in a unique position to be able to help their clients address these concerns and needs from a financial perspective. The third part is just a way to really open a conversation in a human way and to find out if clients have been caregiving for a loved one or are concerned about them, and if there's ways to be thinking about that in the financial plan. And then the fourth big insight is really that HSA or FSA opportunity, which provides that triple tax benefit advantage to the clients and can be a great way to start inching into these healthcare conversations with your clients from a financial planning goal-based way. So all of this turns into client conversations for both prospects and clients. So we'll be sending out all this research after this webinar, but what we wanted to do now was to broaden this out and to invite an expert panel. So I'm going to turn this over to Graham, who is moderating and leading this next part of our webinar. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I seem to be having a little problem with my video, but that's okay. My mother said I had a face for radio. Wanted to first say how honored I am to moderate this panel and introduce this panel of gentlemen scholars and Heather, starting first with Fabrice Bruneau. Fabrice is a former vice chairman of private wealth at JP Morgan and retired to dedicate his time and energy to helping others understand the importance of health and wellness. Hello, Fabrice.
Graham, how are you?
Great, thank you. Also joining us is Daniel Hutcherson, Director of Family and Wealth Planning at Sortino Advisors. Danny has an MA in Gerontology from the University of Southern California and is a postgraduate student at the University of Oxford in the Translational Health Sciences program. So thanks for joining us today, Danny.
Thank you, Graham. Great to be here.
And finally, Bill Martin, who is the CIO of Intrust Bank, where he leads investment strategy for Intrust Wealth Practice, emphasizing goal-based client solutions and tax-aware portfolio optimizations. Hello, Bill.
Hi, Graham.
All right. So we have a lot of ground to cover here. So let's jump right in. Bill, I'm going to start with you. It seems like quote unquote virtual is going to be our reality for a long time to come. What are some trends, technologies, or approaches that you've been looking into to help Intrust keep advisors and clients engaged?
Graham, that's a great question to get us started, and maybe even tying this back to some of the research that Heather just walked us through as a starting point. And one of the areas of opportunity I see as we move forward is how do we reach across a multi-generational span to deliver wealth management services? And traditionally, wealth management has been a face-to-face type of engagement. And what we've really been investing in is what I'd say more of a hybrid type of solution, one that allows us to still engage in a very relationship-driven way, but at the same time to be able to enlist digital tools and give those as options to our clients to move forward. An example of that would be the work that we're doing with Genivity and how that intersects with our financial planning work with our key technology toolkit there being MoneyGuide Pro. And so one of the ways that we have enabled this is to be able to initiate a conversation around that health questionnaire and drive that in a digital format. And the other thing that we've been able to do is through a partnership with the Digital Connection and Digital Hub for our clients through Wealth Access, which has a partnership and integration in with not only MoneyGuide Pro, but with Genivity as well. So through that integration effort, we've been able to deliver some key insights, whether it's financial planning insights, investment management perspectives, or as we're speaking about here, how health and wealth are connected together. And back to that research real quick, one thing that jumped out to me is looking across from a multi-generational level. There's data that's separated out in the appendix that Heather will be sending out that showcases the different generations. And what I noticed in looking through this research is that there is a strong desire, regardless of the age group, to be able to connect with an advisor and not only talk about the financial aspect of managing a portfolio, but really how health and wellness is connected in with the ability to deliver wealth management services. And to me, that represents an opportunity to reach this next generation. So I feel like many advisors have the opportunity to connect well with, let's call it generation one. But that next generation with wealth transfers, it's a moment in which that money in motion is at risk for that current advisor. And by engaging in topics such as healthcare and what that means to that next generation and caring for their family members and how to best prepare and how to open some of those sensitive conversations, this to me feels like a pathway to be able to deliver some of those insights and connection points to the next generation.
Well said. Very well said. Yeah, and I think that is one of the things that we've really seen as far as Halo and the opportunity it gives is that ability to talk cross-generationally and really bring the whole family together. Danny, you have a unique background as both a financial advisor and a gerontologist, and here we are 8 months into this pandemic, no real end in sight. What are the key concerns that you're trying to address with your clients?
Sure. Yeah. So, beyond ensuring that clients have a healthy cash cushion and that portfolios are still aligned with their goals, like Bill's firm, we also use a MoneyGuide Pro driven goals-based planning process. We've been focused on addressing uncertainty. So first, as much as advisors are focused on financial planning, I think it's still important as an advisor to have a deep understanding of the markets and to have a capital markets outlook that reflects the risks and opportunities. So we model the political, economic, pandemic, past crash scenarios against client portfolios using hidden levers, which is one of a number of tools out there. We think it's one of the better tools, and that's become one of the best additions to our process over the last 2 years. And we've used it a lot here, of course, over the last 6 months. Next, after performing over 1,000 financial plans in the last decade, we found that adjustments to inflation, capital markets assumptions, asset allocation shifts have significantly less impact on plan outcomes or probability of success than the assumptions surrounding healthcare costs. And I would challenge the advisors on this call to not just take my word for it, go into those models and double the cost of healthcare and see what happens to the probability of success if the cost of healthcare escalate. As a gerontologist, we're seeing that while life expectancy is rising and the age of onset for many of these diseases, unfortunately, though, hasn't moved much. So we're living longer with dementia, with heart disease, with cancer. So the cost of care is in many cases far greater than expected. So we model individualized longevity and the cost of care using the Halo assessment tool that Genivity provided for us. We're proud to have been a client, for the last couple of years. It's transformed our discussions about what happens after a client retires. And it's important to note, we don't yet know what the long-term health implications of COVID are. This virus has broad tissue tropism, meaning that it attacks multiple organs. So even in those with mild or no illness, we may find down the road that there was replication in the brain and the heart and other organs. So yeah, I think it's especially critical in the pandemic to model that and to have that conversation. And like Bill mentioned, for us, it's opened the door for a multi-generational conversation. You also get to know, their, family histories beyond just the health part as they're completing the Halo assessment. Third, the pandemic has also created a great deal of stress, especially for older clients, around what happens if they actually get a diagnosis. You don't want to spend precious time before a worst case scenario gathering life insurance documents, estate planning, and account passwords. So we're about to roll out EverPlans as a solution to that problem, yet another way of helping to reduce stress and uncertainty for clients. And finally, we can't talk about the pandemic without mentioning the impacts of loneliness and social isolation, not just for clients, but also for us too. And loneliness and social isolation, research has shown, has as much impact on death rates as smoking, as obesity, and a lack of physical activity. So our relationships with clients, our ongoing engagement is valuable and meaningful in the lives of our clients far beyond just the financial part. While financial planning reduces uncertainty, relationships feed the soul in a way that contributes to health and overall well-being. And also, as advisors, let's not forget the role of clients in our lives as well. We are truly fortunate to have careers with such a rich sense of purpose and contribution in a time like this.
Wow, that is excellent. Well said, sir. I have to admit, it's the first cold and rainy day here in Chicago, and I am dreading the onslaught of winter. Yeah, right. Fabrice, as an advisor who is actually also a survivor of COVID-19, can you share with us what that experience was like, and how does that impact or change your perspective on planning?
Well, Danny, thank you for making me feel great about the prospects for my brain and heart in the future, having had COVID already. Hopefully that doesn't come to pass in my particular case. Graham, I'm one of these people who basically never get sick. I'm a health and wellness fanatic, so I do all kinds of things to try and keep myself in good health shape. But I managed to get COVID from my daughter, who brought it back with her from New York when we all decided to shelter in place in Chicago. And in fact, the whole family ended up getting it. And while there's a big range of outcomes for people, some people have no symptoms at all. I would say everyone in my family, showed some degree of symptoms. We all lost our sense of taste and smell, which is a very odd experience to go through. And I had several days of really, not being great at all. Happily, no one had to go to the hospital. But it was definitely not the sniffles. So it was an object lesson in that these things are real, and you had better have some form of a plan associated with it. And I think that was probably the biggest aha moment or takeaway for me from this whole COVID experience. It's really twofold. There's the actual illness itself and the potential downsides from a health perspective and from a cost perspective there. But then there was also the massive interruption of the economy, and a lot of businesses going on hold, and a lot of people's incomes drying up. And it hasn't been the most easy thing to get that ball rolling again. Witness all of the stuff going on in Washington about what do you do about all of these folks who are unemployed, and whole industries that are facing massive layoffs and real questions. So I think this is from an advisor's perspective, it's an interesting time to say, look, a lot of these things, health crises at the personal level and economic crises at the personal level, and maybe the more national and in this case global level, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And if it's going to be when, then we have to plan and we have to prepare. So I think that I think from my perspective is the biggest takeaway from this experience, is to use this very visceral, painful experience to start this planning process.
And what takeaways would you kind of point to as far as with advisors about how this can maybe allow them to have conversations either they haven't had in the past, or deeper conversations? I think there's an opportunity here, and what might that look like?
Yeah, sure. I think the two things that really come to mind, and Danny I think mentioned it before, is you have to have some form of cushion. There's got to be a cash cushion available, because you don't know when an income flow might dry up. And for a lot of people who rely on interest rates to provide them an income, well, they're in the basement. You're not going to get an income flow of any significance, from cash alternatives, and bonds are now trading, with incredibly low interest rates. So that's something that you have to take into account, and you've got to say to yourself, do I have enough cash on hand to pay for all of the things that I'm going to need to pay for in my life? And then you have to make up the time horizon. Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Personally, I think a couple of years is not a bad place to go if you can do it from a cash perspective. So planning that out is huge. And then using something like the Halo analysis is a wonderful way of trying to figure out, in a worst case scenario, what are some of the healthcare costs that I might be facing, and let's have a plan for that, and to start reorganizing one's spending and one's allocation of capital to take that into account.
Yeah, that's great.
And by the way, I would heartily agree with Danny that asset allocation isn't going to save you. It's nice to be able to play with that, but the other scenarios that you got to play with are, where are you going to do your spending as well?
Right, the other side of the equation, the saving. Yes, I know this is something that is near and dear to Bill's heart. So, Bill, let me kick it back to you from the idea of a CIO, specifically around goal-based investing versus goal-based planning, and what might how does that change, especially with the client's longevity intersecting in those decisions?
Yeah, so it is an interesting question, because as I've had a chance to look across the industry, intersect and work with a fair number of peer CIOs and other leaders in the wealth management space, especially when you deliver a team-based approach to delivering advice to clients, you might find these distinct functions, such as financial planning, investment management, and those activities may be done by the same person, or they may be done by distinct members of a team delivering those services. And it's perhaps because of that model that we see planning and the management of the assets somewhat as distinct and separate functions, but yet these need to be very much integrated if we're to deliver the holistic advice that I think we're all each called to provide to our clients. And so in a recent conversation, as a roundtable discussion of some of the nation's largest bank wealth managers, their chief investment officers, and discussions around this topic, I think we walked away and said we all have a lot of work yet to do to figure out how we can bring those two activities better together, planning and investment management. We've already talked about this. Both Danny, Fabrice were saying around from an investment standpoint, the rates that bonds provide right now are at historical lows. And then the problem is you compound this, if now you look at the ability, if we take care of ourselves and through medical breakthroughs, longevity is extended, that is not a great scenario to be in. And then if you distinctly separate the functions of planning from investment management, the advice that we're delivering to our clients may end up being not the best that we can ultimately do as professionals. And so a couple of things that I would that we're working on, that we're thinking through as it relates to this, is specifically on when you run a plan. One of the things that we've noticed is it doesn't make much sense when we ultimately try to change asset allocations. Yes, it may be a risk tolerance discussion and some other things related to that, but ultimately what can improve plans the most is the saving or spending rates that are part of that. But what are some other things that blow up the plans? And this is interesting. Again, it's less about maybe these asset allocation decisions. If you got good capital market assumptions plugged into the planning tools, what it ultimately ends up being are things like how long will that client live? So if you model out maybe just an average lifespan, but then you look at somebody that potentially could live 95 years or 100 or maybe even longer, all of a sudden those financial plans begin to show some stress on them. Another area is if you take the Halo assessment and look at the details underneath of that, of these estimated healthcare costs, and you plug that into the financial plan and you prorate that based on a little higher escalation rate or inflation rate for these healthcare costs. Again, this is another area, if we don't plan adequately, can ultimately really end up hurting the ability to meet all those goals. And then you pull this back and figure out what's the right way that we can manage these assets to accomplish this. One of the areas that we're exploring and beginning to move forward with is the integration of what I'd say commission-free insurance solutions, including the use of annuities and some other factors to be able to blend this together in a traditional investment management portfolio to address some of those concerns, whether it's longevity, income needs, or others. And I believe there's going to be a lot more innovation in the space as we move forward, but those are things that are in front of minds of many people that are sitting in the same seats as I am, as we're delivering advice to the clients that we're serving.
Thanks, Bill. That was fantastic. I guess, Fabrice, you've actually talked about your personal asset classes. Can you maybe share those with us as well? I think it's a really interesting and unique viewpoint.
Oh, thanks. I've been struck, and increasingly so, by the similarities between health management and wealth management. There is an enormous overlap between them. And one of the things that you always look at in financial assets are asset classes. What have you got to play with? You've got stocks, you've got bonds, you've got cash, you've got private equity, you've got the various sort of levers that you can pull. And I think people are generally quite aware of those. I don't know that people are as aware or as active in thinking about their health portfolio. and their health portfolio is driven by a series of let's call them asset classes, which would be what's the state of your metabolic health, driven by your nutrition, what kind of sleep are you getting, what sort of mental support do you have, all of those sort of things basically contribute to how well you're going to be and how well you're going to ride something out. And much in the same way that you can't make really good financial decisions unless you pulled all of your assets together, then that's the same sort of thing that you should be doing with your personal assets. So going to your doctor and getting a full blood panel and knowing what your lipid profile is, and particularly knowing what your vitamin and mineral deficiencies are. Those are the sort of things that you want to be thinking about, because let's say you were deficient in vitamin D3. Well, guess what? D3 is super important in terms of COVID-19 because the virus attaches to the same receptors in your lungs that D3 could occupy if you had enough of it. So that's a really good example of, if you don't know yourself, how are you going to make those positive changes? Same way looking at your custody statement with your financial advisor. You can't make good financial decisions if you don't know how much cash or stock or bonds that you have. Similarly, you need to do the same sort of inventory on the health level. And health and wealth are similar in another respect, in that they both have a cumulative compounding impact as well. So the parallels could go on, but I'll leave it there.
Fascinating. You've obviously put a lot of time and effort into this. I guess, Danny, this brings up another pretty interesting point, and that is the roles advisors can play, and Fabrice is really kind of bridging this, that in protecting their clients, say, versus a physician. I would think that you've probably thought about this a whole lot with your education.
Right. Yeah. So, in fact, my venture into gerontology was because I, over the course of a 24-year career, had so many clients fall victim to elder financial exploitation, and protecting them was very difficult, both when I was on the wirehouse side and with an enormous compliance complex assisting and supporting us, and then on the RIA side, where we found that conflicts between privacy, Reg SP, and our fiduciary duty of care, where in some cases violating privacy is in the client's best interest, even and especially when it's not in ours. It was difficult to reconcile, that. So in terms of protecting clients, that is exactly why I got into gerontology. And after spending some time on the academic side, it's become more clear than ever that more so than CPAs, than attorneys, and I say this delicately and with respect, even more so than physicians, financial advisors are best positioned outside the family unit to observe and detect signs of change in cognitive functioning, and to recognize vulnerability, particularly in older clients, although it's not only in older clients. Prior to a client being diagnosed with dementia or mild cognitive impairment, the changes are less noticeable. When you're a family member and you're so close to it, sometimes it's tough to recognize, as in the thought stream of a day, okay, one day something is done differently, but then that different thing continues the next day, and we don't recognize that sometimes as part of an overall change. And also to physicians who are prior to the pandemic, we're lucky to spend 8 to 12 minutes with patients. Now they're, able to spend even less time. And in many cases, patients are reluctant, to go in and get checked out. Financial capacity is one of the first domains of cognitive functioning to become affected. And as financial advisors, we can see those changes. It involves, financial capacity involves the hippocampus and several other parts of the brain that are involved in executive functioning, those complex decisions related to beneficiary changes, to just following, as you're going through, you're delivering the financial plan, questions they would have normally asked, they're not asking. Have they changed their password on the site multiple times because they can't remember it. We know clients, we are in their lives in a way that most professionals just don't have the opportunity. It's not a condemnation, of CPAs who are largely busy doing the work that it requires behind the scenes to be able to file returns. And the same thing with attorneys and the teams that support them. Our business is the relationship. And so, we have a unique perspective, on that. And that position of trust is not only just the intimacy of the financial details. We get to know their families, and we talk about fears, motivations, goals, and values. So for all the advisors on the call, take notes, talk with your compliance team, even if you notice just subtle changes. And please, if you're on the RIA side where it's not yet a requirement, make sure you have a trusted contact on file, and that will set you apart, at least from many of the financial advisors we talk with, in being, one of the first responders, being a care partner to clients, and really going beyond what the traditional advisors has covered within the scope of a client-advisor relationship.
Again, really well said. Obviously, the simple solution for this is Halo. But if you as advisors were going to suggest to other advisors, where would you maybe get started? And I'll start with Fabrice on
that. Graham, you mean get started in what kind of conversation?
Yeah, just kind of really educating themselves around, for you, with your expertise, it's health. What would you sort of point out? Where are your go-to resources to learn about health, to educate yourselves, and then potentially do the to and the through to clients?
Well, I think that there are certain things that are particularly prevalent in healthcare costs. And knowing that, even if you're not a physician, if you're a financial advisor, it is helpful to know that something on the order of 85% of American healthcare spending is on things that are of a lifestyle nature. And type 2 diabetes and obesity, and to a degree, Alzheimer's, all have a similar metabolic pathway. And a lot of those problems can be mediated by lifestyle changes if you're looking in the right places and getting decent advice about how you're eating, how you're looking after your blood profiles and things like that. So understanding that there's this huge thing out there that people can do something about is really quite interesting. And frankly, it's one of the fun things about Halo is that you can actually play with the advisor can play with the model with their client and make a few lifestyle changes and see pretty dramatically what that does in terms of shortening the amount of assisted living or changing the amount of costs that client might have. So I think you can play some interesting what if scenarios with your client in areas that they have control over. That's a place where they've got scope of control. They might not be able to control being hit by a car or the next financial crisis, but they can control what they put on their dinner plate.
Great. And Daniel, same question to you. Any kind of places that you might advise an advisor to start thinking, learning more?
Well, I would say connect with each of us on LinkedIn, and really just follow the feeds. Fabrice did a series, if you don't mind me sharing with everyone on his experiences with COVID. I think if you're an advisor who hasn't yet had a client experience that, I think you need to watch the podcast that he did to really get an understanding of what that experience is like. I mean, most of the advisors I think who are on this call are part of institutions who are deeply committed to financial planning as a driver of the investment management process. So to take that a step beyond it, I think your first step in understanding health in the context of the COVID era should be to watch Fabrice's podcast, connect with us, watch our streams, and you really just be an active participant in the development, of the industry as it relates to professional designations, where you also get a great deal of exposure to these concepts.
Thank you. Great idea. Opportunity, Bill, I know you have a passion for technology, and because Intrust has multiple offices and literally thousands of clients, you sit in an interesting place where you're interacting with so many different people. And I'd wonder, the opportunity of planning for everyone. We're seeing a proliferation of tools, often free tools for financial planning. The availability to do planning at scale for people who have traditionally been underserved, and maybe even the different models of payment that are coming out that are available to financial advisors. I wonder if you could sort of talk about all those things and how, planning is evolving.
Graham, there's a lot packed into that. That could be an entire webinar, but let me try to summarize a few thoughts quickly here. So one of the things that I do believe is important, I was reading a study that over the weekend that Bank of America put out relative to financial wellness, a concept that is continuing to gain traction. And it was looking particularly inside retirement plans and some of the trends that were taking place. One of the things that stood out to me, there were several things. We talked about HSAs a little bit, and that was one where I feel like there's low-hanging fruit, and to continue to encourage our clients and that next generation to take advantage of that opportunity. But there was clearly a desire to be able to have advice given to people that are just entering the workforce, or maybe 10 or 15 years into it, that traditionally wouldn't be the type of client that maybe a wealth advisor would be trying to target. The wealth hasn't amassed yet. And so I do believe, and I can only speak for the experiences inside our shop, we are working really hard to integrate the work that's taking place in our retirement plan offerings, working with plan sponsors and participants and education that's there, and linking that back to the advisory type of work that we're doing with our high net worth and ultra high net worth clients, and really being able to deliver an advice model, taking advantage of some of the virtual ability to deliver one-on-one advice, but in a more, I guess, cost-friendly approach to deliver that across maybe a fairly wide geographic footprint. Those are some things that I think that advisors that are trying to tap into, how do we connect advice and financial planning in different ways? That's certainly a way that we're looking and evaluating at doing this. And Graham, I know you didn't ask this, but I'll maybe do what it's going to take place in the debates coming up later this week. Answer a question you didn't ask, but I think it's an important one that I would want to provide, and that's linking this back to some of the research that Heather found and highlighted that. It was maybe not lost on me that nearly 70% of the participants that completed that survey were female. Another area, if you look at the transferring of wealth that's going to occur in the future, women are going to hold more wealth than men. But traditionally, it's been an area where I think we have an opportunity as a profession to deliver services in a different way that connects in a way uniquely to each individual, but definitely to women in the way that they interface with wealth. I've heard Heather use the term, and this isn't universal, but I would say generally in working with the advisory teams, this would be the case, that the female typically ends up being the chief medical officer of the family. The other thing is that the females and the women that we're working with generally do like this type of advice, and the ability to intersect between health, wellness, and the management of the wealth, and then ultimately how this impacts the family, not only for themselves, but the next generation. So if advisors are looking to tap into that power of really this continuing growth of wealth within women, I believe this is an opportunity for the smart advisor to tap into this, to really reach and to connect with a segment of population that sometimes I would say we haven't done the best job in serving as we move forward. So a lot packed in that response, but great questions. And I'll turn it back to you, Graham.
Great question, Bill. let's see. One thing that I definitely want to make sure we touch on is strategies for HSAs. Obviously, that is a growing but relatively unknown opportunity for investors. Fabrice, as a strategy for high net worth, and as we approach an open enrollment season, how would you approach clients with that conversation?
Well, I'm a good person to ask because I have my first HSA account that I've opened and funded. I think it's incumbent on any good advisor to be helping their client pull as many levers as they have at their disposal that can help them. So if you ever get a chance to make a pre-tax contribution into an account that can compound tax-free and come out tax-free for a particular purpose, you can't walk past that. That is a money machine that it would be criminal not to at least investigate. And so I think what a good advisor will do is, first of all, basically put some parameters around the issue. And if you can get your client to run a halo analysis, you'll end up with a very knowable number that you're targeting for potential healthcare costs. And I think people pay attention to dollar numbers much better than they pay attention to broad theoretical concepts. So if you've got that extremely valuable target to aim at and say, you've got X hundreds of thousands of dollars of care costs that are not going to be covered by all of the other things that you've got right now, we've got to do something about that. Well, let's model an HSA if it's possible for the client, because you have to meet certain criteria. There has to be a high deductible plan that you're involved in. The premium, the out-of-pocket levels have to be at particular levels. But let's model that and see what happens if we put in the maximum, if we grow that with some sensible long-term asset allocation over time. Will that have money at the end of the day to pay for this particular cost that we've identified by using Halo? And I think what's really interesting to me is, and we talked about cumulative compounding a little bit before, a lot of the assumptions that advisors are using for healthcare cost increases are way ahead of the assumptions for inflation. So I know Heather and the team at Genivity use a 5% inflation number, and Bill and Danny, you may use different ones, but I bet you it's not 1.5 or 2. To match the cumulative compounding of 5%, you on a post-tax basis outside of an HSA, you need to be a hero of investing. You need to be in all equity and getting it right all the time. I don't know if any of us want to, claim that we can do that. So much better to say, look, if I can take a much more sensible approach through investing in a tax-exempt portfolio that won't be taxed on the way out, I still think I can keep up with that 5% escalating cost analysis. And these are the kind of analytics that I think a good financial advisor is doing with their client, and that's the sort of thing that wins them repeat business. And that's the sort of thing the client's not getting from a do-it-yourself, version of some online Money Guide Pro element.
Well said. We only have a couple minutes left, but to that last topic, Danny, anything you're doing with the HSAs? I assume you agree with most everything Fabrice said. Anything additional that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think really just more from a practice management and relationship opportunity, that HSAs present an opportunity to talk to the matriarch and patriarch of the family about incorporating that into gifting for kids and grandkids who are in the working population. They're not going to say no to opening an account with you when their parents have mandated it or said, hey, instead of giving you a check for X amount, here's what I want to do this year, and I've modeled it through my financial advisor, and here's the power of doing this. So, I think if you're a financial advisor on this call and you're not taking advantage of that, this is a great year-end opportunity to reach out. And the next wave is calls with CPAs. We like to put together tax packets, care packets for our CPAs, upload all the documents without being asked to, double check, make the documents are there. Well, this is something you can be doing at the end of the year, and you should be doing to connect with your clients and move up and down that family tree in a way that'll be meaningful for them.
Perfect. And Bill, final word to you.
Just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak on this panel. It's a great honor. I believe the topic that we've been speaking about in general, the connection between health and wealth, and what that means is really going to be an area that can help power the advice that we're delivering to our clients and create those moments of connection that will create loyalty and engagement with our clients. And I just believe so much in the work that Heather and her team is doing. Would encourage, if you haven't had a chance to take a closer look at Genivity, to go ahead and do so. Phenomenal company, especially when you fold that into the full comprehensive type of advice that we've been speaking to this afternoon. Thank you, Graham.
Yeah, well said, Bill. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Fabrice. Heather, last word to you.
Well, I mean, this was everything and more than I could have hoped for. I really appreciate you all being on here. I think all three of you bring such interesting lenses to the world that we're living in right now. And I learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. And so thank you. Obviously, this is a topic that we are deeply passionate about and believe that advisors can really differentiate themselves with. And it was great to learn from some of your insights along the way. So thank you all who joined us for our webinar today. We will be sharing the recording along with some of the supplementary materials along with this. And we'll give you links to all of our panelists and some of the great work that they're doing if you're wanting to learn more. So thank you. Thank you for your time today, and take care.